And here's the moment where, as per usual, it says live. I'm never convinced it is. So we always have about 20 seconds of faffing around, triple checking. The minute that any of you give me a thumbs up, then let me know. But yeah, looks it to me.
Yeah, we are.
Looks live. People are joining. Happy days. Okay. So this is the 8th and final Therapy Live newscast. I can say that I'm relieved at that. My wife certainly is. Monday, Wednesday, Friday for a few weeks. But there have been important ways in which we've been announcing each stream. And it was always meant to be and planned to be an 8-stream show in which, if it all went well, then we could do this 9th stream, which is pretty much everything that ideally I most love, really, which is setting up debates and discussions and panels and things. So whilst excited for the rest of it has facilitated this to some extent. And so when that's all been going well and people have been registering and we know that there's going to be a capacity on some of those sessions, then we wanted to get some discussion going and start thinking policy. And the best way to do that is through, of course, MSK Reform, the grassroots think tank. And these are some of our associate directors and my co-director, Felicity Thow, joining us to talk a little bit about what we've got in store. Now, I'm going to pull up the graphic in a second, which gives you a clue as to the agenda. Unlike the others, where the other Therapy Live newscasts, where we've had all the panel, all the speakers, we've now got the moderators because it'd be rather cluttered. We've got about 30 voices on that stream on panels rather than presentations through that day. So instead, we're going to talk about it session by session, thinking about why these topics are important and why we really felt it was important to cover them. We had a I'm mixing them up, MSKR roadshow planned, multi-stop roadshow planned this year, which has now obviously been compromised somewhat, as well as some of the themes and plans that we had for that not being as current as we'd often like to be. So instead, we're going to do this stream and then reevaluate as to which of those topics we should visit, which might be sensible virtual events that we might do, followed by face-to-face ones when appropriate, if that is something that you guys are still hungry for. So there's lots to think about, lots to talk about. But certainly want to get stuck into what the themes and topics are. If you haven't already got a ticket, then you are one of very few. We hit 17,000 registrations today, and so we are well on track for that 20,000 mark, which is this stretch goal for Therapy Live with 2 weeks to go. So 2 weeks today, 26th of June 2020, is this massive game-changing show for Therapy Live, of which this is one of 9 streams of education. The full agenda is out, and you'll see that as the pinned links on all of our social media through Physio Matters and through Therapy Live itself. And so what we have called this is the MSKR Thinking in Public stream. And so feast your eyes on those titles. They are going to be panel discussions with 3 or 4 people, and the moderators are, of course, some of the prime thinkers in that space. And so what we didn't want is them to be just asking the questions. They'll also be participating. What we don't want is for any sort of pretense that they're going to just sit as flat neutral on those questions. They've got plenty of opinions to go around, and definitely ones that you guys want to hear about. So they will be participating as moderators and holding the other panelists to account appropriately. And as you see, we're all taking turns, but it's also worth mentioning there that Jonathan Hersey, I don't know how to pronounce his surname. I should have worked that out, shouldn't I? Matthew might know. We'll talk about that afterwards. But if you notice, he's going to be a guest moderator on that final session of the day, which we'll come to talk about in order, because this is actually an order of play for the day. But massive thanks to him for confirming that he's going to be able to join. He's actually joining one of the panels as well, but then he's going to be doing a guest moderating session at the end of the day. So I will intermittently flash this back up on screen, but as you can see there, the first order of business is one of the words that's on everyone's lips, or should be, which is rehabilitation, understanding, funding, and delivering it, which I would say the evidence certainly points to. When it comes to scaling someone's function and abilities, then rehabilitation is sort of a catch term for that. It's something that's being discussed in COVID and non-COVID patients right now, and also is at the heart of what we would advocate, and certainly what the Manifesto for Reform suggests. And so we definitely want to be talking about that. And it just seemed to be a smart way to start the day. Now, let me just make sure I don't read the wrong names because they're all sloshing around in my head. But who will be joining Emma Salt on that panel? We have former NHS England Director of Rehabilitation, John Etherington. We've got Connect Medical Director, Graham Wilkes. We've got the CSP's Sarah Hazard, who heads up their Right to Rehab campaign. And we have Ben Wilkins from Good Boost, as well as Versus Arthritis, who will be talking a little bit about the aspects that they've been working on with his company and enterprise around utilising leisure facilities, as well as other community infrastructure for rehabilitation use, which is going to be a really fascinating angle that he brings. But there's several big names there, but the biggest of all, of course, is our very own Associate Director, Emma Salt, who certainly will be talking a little bit about the evidence, no doubt, as ever. She's in charge of evidence for MSK reform. But Emma, why do you think, if you do agree, that it's a smart thing for us to be talking about?
What, in this current climate or generally? Because
both. We'll go both.
Yes. I suppose generally, musculoskeletal is such a prevalent, such a prevalent group of disorders, as we know, and there are pockets of really good research happening. But compared to some of the other large health disorders that we know about, cancer, heart disease, etc., it probably doesn't have a much prevalent presence on the evidence stage, and I think that's a real disappointment, especially as if we address musculoskeletal disorders, it will probably have a huge impact on these other major health concerns such as diabetes, heart disease, stroke, etc., obesity, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, I'm really enthusiastic about trying to get it more, I think, as physiotherapists, as musculoskeletal physiotherapists, musculoskeletal chiropractors, osteopaths, we're all very passionate about it, but it's trying to make sure it's high on everybody else's agenda as well. And I think even though it's high on our agenda, making sure that everybody's actively engaged in the research rather than just giving it lip service. I hear from a lot of colleagues who work in MSK, but they feel it's something that's for other people who are more clever than themselves. And I just totally disagree about that. If I can do it, anyone can do it. So I think everybody needs to be actively engaged in not just implementing research, but if they can, being involved in moving the whole thing forward. In terms of, I'll go on, Jack, you were going to ask
I was just, a sub-question that's just emerged really for me is when everything got stripped back a little bit and everyone started to think in terms of needing to work virtually and thought, what is at the heart of care, especially in the therapy disciplines, then rehab just seemed to be, it kind of, I would say this proved our point a little bit when we think about what we'd said in the manifesto as to what should be at the heart of what brings us all together. We'd said that ahead of time, and it seemed to almost just emerge even out of corners that you wouldn't expect it. People said, actually, yeah, that's the special sauce. That's the thing that's at the heart of it.
I mean, I think you're right there, because I mean, the thing we have most evidence for compared to anything else that we do is exercise and engagement in exercise, and that's the core. That's our key core to rehabilitation. And although I've been researching other things myself, such as suprascapular nerve blocks and things like that, which is very exciting, I believe, but the true evidence lies, or the true things which underpins our practice is in exercise and exercise-based rehabilitation. So it's really interesting now how we've been stripped back with the COVID pandemic. We've been stripped back from being able to do certain things such as injecting people, manipulating people, taping people, all the other adjuncts that we've used. And we've had our hands forced, or some people have had their hands forced to have to revert back to perhaps what's considered the basics, but it's also our USP for rehabilitation, which is exercise. Very interestingly, I've been doing, obviously, as with the rest of the nation and probably the rest of the world, we've been doing video consultations and telephone consultations. And just a patient of mine who I've been she's got chronic pain, and I've been trying to say to her, come on, we really need to get you engaged in rehabilitation and exercise, and trying to give her the locus of control. And she's been taken on a very much like passive, I came to you for an injection, that's what you need to do. And since this COVID pandemic started, she said to me the other day on a video consultation, I've actually finally decided to do the Couch to 5K, and it's going really well. I realise now that I can't see you, so I'm going to have to get on and do it myself. And you're like, hooray! The pennies drop. So I think it will be interesting from a research perspective to see how many people are now going to go on and do really well. Are they, or are they not? We don't know yet, do we? But yeah, that's a big question there in itself.
I think that's going to be an interesting thing, and certainly one that I think, given more space in the day than we might have been able to visit, like, is it a patient's going to have felt abandoned, or are they going to feel like it actually spurred them on and they developed self-efficacy? Is it that people that were otherwise struggling to wean from health-seeking behaviour, actually it sort of spurred them on and they felt all right, or is it that actually they've then felt very isolated? It's so hard to know. But it'll be interesting for us to test that water, and I'm sure we'll be able to collect that data. I know that you and your team are already talking about some of that, I know, in the evidence working group. We're getting some lovely comments already coming in, so please post your questions and comments. I think what we will do on this one is sort of, if I notice them coming in, we'll try and weave them in rather than just do them at the end. If there's general questions, we'll do them at the end. We're getting some lovely comments already coming in, so please post your questions. I'm getting some feedback on that. Is anyone there? Who had me on playback then? Caught out. Having to hear myself. Now, one of the comments that's come in here is really interesting. Gemma Oliver, whose name will come up later because she's on a panel. Patients have also started to be more aware of the basics like rehab, fundamentals we're calling them, of course, and they've found that they've been really empowered by this. I think that's one of the interesting things. It's all well and good us saying it, but is that following suit with patients? Another comment from Jenny Archer, a bit of a long one, and a really lovely point that she's making about things not necessarily having changed very much since before the First World War, with the way in which care is delivered. I think I'd agree in principle with that, Jenny, when it comes to our understanding of this. Over time, we've come to realise that the fundamentals are the fundamentals of scale and function. However, I'm not suggesting you're overlooking this, Jenny, but potentially there's also the argument there's been plenty of fads and trends in the interim, and certainly ones that we need to make the case that doing the basics and fundamentals right needs to trump some of the gadgets and gizmos. And so, sometimes it's a good point to say, well, things are, we're coming back around 100 years, but it's also relevant to think about what's different is we kind of know the strength of argument is better against some of the other styles of practice that are very much out there. What we're talking about, if we'd all be out of a job and the think tank wouldn't exist if what we're talking about was standard practice and standard care without a postcode lottery, or not, it didn't matter who it was you saw, what clinician you saw, and the care delivery was of a quality standard. So yeah, lovely points. Please do get your comments coming in. That's great. Let me flash back up on screen what we've got in store next. One of the things that these graphics have been useful for on the newscast is reminding everyone what it is they're talking about. Now, Matthew, you're a busy man, but I doubt for a second that you would have needed this graphic to remember what you're talking about, one of your favourite subjects. Is it time for competency-based MSK recruitment? I will now announce your panel and then throw it to you to talk a little bit about what it is you're looking forward to. On Matthew's panel, we have what is sensible. We have a multidisciplinary approach to this. We have Catherine Quinn from the British Chiropractic Association, Ollie Coburn, the registrar at the British Association of Sports Rehabilitators, and then we have Graham Smith from the Society of Sports Therapy. We're also going to be joined by a physiotherapist, yet unnamed, who we're wanting to, there's plenty of people out there and with plenty of policies that some organisations have about the fact that physiotherapists, in their opinion, are the people to employ based on them being physiotherapists in various different roles. And so we're trying to find the right person that's going to go into bat for that argument. We did approach physios in sport. We're going to now approach the mothership. I think what we will do on this one is... I'm getting some feedback again. Sorry. We're going to find out who's that going to be on that final piece in that panel. But generally speaking, Matthew, what is it we're getting at with that question? And how does that mop onto your manifesto chapter? Because it certainly feels familiar.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a surprise what my position on this, because I think we were pretty clear in the manifesto regarding this. But ultimately, it probably comes down to, and our argument is about who do you want treating your mum, your dad, your brother, your sister, your best friend? Do you want a physiotherapist or a osteopath, chiropractor, rehab therapist, or do you want the most qualified and suitable clinician with the best competencies? And that's certainly the argument we put forward in the manifesto for change, and that's what we'll be exploring in more detail on the panel. And I think probably be one of the more controversial panels, hopefully, because I think there will be some differing opinions. But hopefully we're going to get a little bit towards solutions rather than just throwing out the concept there. And I think it's interesting because I had a chat with Greg Lehman earlier in the week, and Ollie Coburn, who's been on my panel. And I think the question has always been asked, what's the difference between a chiropractor, an osteopath, and a physio? And I think the answer now, if they're following the evidence, there shouldn't be any difference. And the same with the other professions within MSK, because we've got enough evidence to tell us what core of our treatment is, and Emma's touched on that, it's rehabilitation, and there are nuances and grey areas within that. But I think we want to start to explore how do we get as many clinicians as possible providing high quality rehabilitation. So hopefully we'll get some good debate going.
Sounds juicy. I think one of the big things that people wonder is when we're talking about this, and we're talking about it makes so much sense to people that they think, well, is that not what's happening already? Especially those out of industry, or sometimes patients, especially we're in a growing number of patients that are finding MSK reform, reading the manifesto, joining, sent out 3 massive boxes of manifestos to new members this week, because obviously certain post offices have been closed, or they've not been sending stuff en masse and stuff. So I managed to get a load of membership packs out, and a lot of them to patients. And some of the feedback we've been getting to some of that work is sort of surprised that, you know, we maybe didn't unpack exactly what is currently happening, which is that some roles are earmarked by profession. So some roles are employed into purely because of the type of certificate that someone has, in a way that doesn't necessarily offer a distinction between the disciplines. And that is something that we're challenging to some extent. And I think that that's where, if we were to try and find and frame a way of making it about competency, then one of the questions that I hope it will come out in the wash really with that discussion won't just be about that entry point or who, it'll also be about what would that look like then? You know, how would we create a system of interprofessional governance that could then really sustain that argument? Because the bigger thing would be to suggest that by breaking down what is an only layer of entry criteria would be that it'd be a Wild West. That's sort of the low-hanging fruit critique of what we've said. And so I'm looking forward to you guys getting into the weeds a little bit on that, on a long one of the 90-minute panels where you'll be able to get stuck into those sorts of bits and pieces. What do you think it will unearth, Matthew? Especially, do you think it will? Do you think it'll be clashes from the off, or do you think there's particular points of contention?
I genuinely don't know, and actually, I kind of hope that it will unearth what people perceive the barriers to be, because certainly it's something I've spent probably the last 3 years looking at, and I can't see any justification if people meet the competency framework, and I think it's got to be very competency governance driven, and it's certainly not about lowering the bar in any shape or form. In fact, my argument would be that we're increasing the bar because we're increasing competition. If you can't recruit, or you have a very small field of, say, physiotherapists, we'll pick on physios because I'm a physio, it's safe for me to pick on physios. If you've got 3 applicants to the job and they're all physios, but then if you can then get 10 applicants because you open it up, then surely that's got to be better, because you're going to get you can pick the best of the 10 rather than the best of the 3. I suspect some of the arguments will come back to training. I think the 1,000 hours, which is the conversation that always comes up when we talk about these things, But certainly there are ways around that, and we're not going to shy away from those barriers and gaps. I think, again, we're going to look really at solutions to those, but I think that there may well be some tribalism that emerges.
Yeah, perhaps. I think it's worth us mentioning as well that you're the Associate Director for MSK Reform for Clinical Excellence, and the whole point of everything we're doing, but especially in your work, is about this idea that it's not just about making arguments for argument's sake, it's about raising standards. Now, the mechanism for raising standards that you're alluding to there is this idea that the best people fighting for that role, regardless of what their certificate says, is going to drive standards and lead to cream rising to the top. I'm really looking forward to trying to find someone that might argue against that being smart. You know, some people are averse to a competition-based approach to be that interviewing, application processes, and maybe some of the shortcomings in the wider sort of recruitment evidence, let's say, that might emerge from that if people want to oppose it. So really looking forward to it. What I think we'll do next is announce our next panel, but we'll double back around on some of the comments and questions that are coming back in about that. Lots of agreement, but also there's already some hot debate about what the brave new world will be, and I think that we'll probably end up summarising on stuff that's a merger of all the panels. You know, there's lots of ones here that finish with post-COVID, and so I think we're going to be able to have a chat and see what your guys' thoughts are on what the brave new world we're going to face is. The third panel, and because I'm pretty sure these are in order, is with Paula, Deacon, and it says and guests, of course, our panelists. What factors will affect MSK service design post-COVID? Now, again, let me pull up my list of who her esteemed panelists are going to be. And this is a topic that me and Paula have had many a drink over the years, and many a debate over the years, and the post-COVID feature is one of the only interesting new variables, because service design is so hotly contested in peacetime. So what we will do, I'm trying to find my list now, very slick as ever. Here we are. So joining Paula on our panel for factors affecting service design, Neil Langridge, Jonathan Hersey, Hannah Morley, Martin Fiddick. So Neil Langridge, probably likely to not need introduction, consultant physio, and a great thinker in general, but someone that's been reflecting an awful lot on what we might, and wrote a lovely blog a few weeks ago, which certainly overlapped with some of the work that I've been writing for MSKR through the Rehab Recruits campaign. We then spoke about how, what could it look like? How could we use these things and these as an opportunity to build something new? Jonathan Hersey, someone who's sort of always thinking broadly and innovatively about structural service design, working out of London in a leadership role. Hannah Morley, someone who currently doing a PhD in understanding some of the cross-country and cross-cultural factors affecting advanced practice, first contact practice, and we'll definitely have a lot to say about what her learning has guided her in thinking what opportunities could knock in the current situation, because she was certainly agitating for some very interesting changes and progress even before all of this kicked off. And finally, Martin Fiddick from Nuffield Health, someone whose angle is certainly going to be really interesting from the way in which they've needed to crisis manage the situation as a company, but then also they're a healthcare charity with a remit to improve the healthcare of the nation, not just through a basic profit model of trying to transmit their business. Essentially, Nuffield are going to be planning to step up into what people don't really know about them, which is this support process and safety net that they are to the health service. And it's going to be interesting to hear from him about the way in which their service design could potentially overlap better with the public sector than it has done in the past. So very exciting set of names there. But again, the most exciting of them all, of course, Associate Director for Clinical Governance for MSKR, Paula Deacon. Paula, what are you looking forward to from this panel? And also, how do you feel it's relevant to clinical governance right now?
I'm super excited by the my guests that are joining me. What it's going to look like post-COVID and what factors. I mean, there's some real thinkers, isn't there, on that panel that have got so much knowledge and expertise. But I think the biggest challenge is none of us really know, and we've got no experience in it. So I think it's sort of everyone's cards on the table, and just hearing what people are thinking in their own environments. You know, we've got lots of factors, haven't we, affecting MSK care moving forwards. Social distancing is going to be a huge one for everybody, that anyone that we can get in, are our estates fit for purpose? How are we going to manage the flow of patients? Have we got enough PPE? Who's coming in on what days? How are we going to remote work? How do we write the governance to support all these different ways of working? Because the old way is no longer the new way. So I'm just really excited by hearing what everyone thinks about that. What could it look like? Everyone's got their own ideas, haven't they, based on their own services, but it's very variable where you work, very variable with your estates you work in, the close proximity we work in. How are we going to get the numbers through that we're all commissioned in the old way of working? That's going to be a real challenge for everyone. Commissioners are going to be, you know, trying to keep their numbers coming through, yet we won't have the same capacity. Our same systems won't work anymore. We've really got to redesign our services, and nobody knows what that will look like. We haven't got the literature to support what that will look like. I think what's really exciting is that with MSKR as well, grassroots, we should be influencing that space, and we should be helping our leaders make the right choices, because we're the grassroots and we can help look at what works. I think the governance side of it's been really interesting, that we've sort of had to move away a little bit from the clinical governance into the governance for staff safety, patient safety first and foremost. And so almost the practicalities of what we've had to deal with imminently with COVID hasn't had any governance to support it, because we haven't had time to deal with it. No time at all. In practice that none of us knew about. We haven't learned, we haven't trained to be remote working, a lot of us anyway. We haven't learned how to do electronic things. We're learning as we go along, but there's no governance behind it to support it. So it's been a real challenge. And we'll get there, but nobody will have it perfect at the minute. So together, I think it's going to be a great journey to hear on that panel what people are thinking about, what it looks like for them.
Do you think that there's two schools I'm witnessing where people are just saying, well, thank God we can turn us back now on this silly video consulting lark, and they're just trying to rush back to old ways because it just didn't suit styles of practice or things like that. And then there's another side that just say that there's very few that are suggesting, well, this is the style of practice that should remain and we should barely see people. Mainly the sensible voices, certainly in that space, are thinking like, what is the nexus between virtual and in-person care? How can we create an efficiency of not needing to necessarily see everyone in person, decrease travel time, increase accessibility, change the postcode demographics of attendance, and the things that can open up. What's your, obviously you don't want to give too many spoilers maybe on your hot take, but what's your opinion on whether or not we should be trying to work as quickly as we can revert back to a predominantly face-to-face model? Or do you think that integration is a natural option?
I think remote working shouldn't replace face-to-face. I think remote working should allow us to see the correct face-to-face patients that need face-to-face. So I think that is absolutely, I feel, what the benefits of remote working are, or telehealth are. It frees up the capacity, so the ones who do need it. So because there will be inequalities with telehealth, people haven't got access to it, people can't use it if English isn't their first language. So the ones that can't use it should be the ones that we are freeing our time up to see face to face. So I mean, inequalities, yeah, we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful of people who can't use it. And that's where our face-to-face, that's who we should be opening our services up for, not the ones who can be managed over the phone or virtually. So I think it's just being aware of what cohort of patients do we actually need face-to-face, because the numbers won't be the same anymore. It will completely change our percentage of how many we see face-to-face. And it has to, because we can't see that many in clinic. We've got a distance. We might have to have a one-way system. You come in one way, you have to go out the other. It's going to completely change. We're not going to have the admin there anymore because we haven't got the space, or they'll be doing it differently from home, or we don't know. The whole thing has got to look very differently. But I don't think just because it's been, we've been forced the technology on us, which has been a positive, it's not a replacement for face-to-face. It will never be a replacement, because the ones who need face-to-face still should have face-to-face. And that's what we need to just make sure we've got enough capacity for that. So we just, we just got to think differently.
And that's one of the things with Therapy Live as well, is that because we've got such a broad range of sort of clinical, operational, the core skills thing is sort of that interface. Yeah. And including that, we've got Katie Napton speaking on virtual consults on a really specialist level from her experiences from years of doing it, not just reacting and doing it, but having really thrashed out the pros and cons and having a real, what we consider to be a real mature model of not being a devotee to it. You know, she's not someone that's an absolutist, as I'm sure there are a few of, but in a general rule, she is someone that is going to be coming through that and discussing that from the clinical angle and giving people the clinical prep and skills to optimize that. But similarly, there are going to be accusations of people being opportunists and seeing this as being such a disruption that it's just that a rehab style of practice or a guidance and coaching model that is more hands-off than is some people's classic styles of practice. Some people see this as being an opportunity to beat up on manual therapists, electrotherapists, tapists. Is that even a word? But you get my drift. How do we make sure that we don't get carried away on a theme and use this as a way in which we are clumsily just peddling a narrative rather than getting into the weeds on that analysis appropriately?
I think again, you know, the probably the retrospective data will help us understand what patients can be managed in a certain way, because again, we've not really got a lot of evidence to support. Can we pick the cohorts of patients that we're managing? And every area might be a little bit different, and that's what makes it unique, doesn't it? The data. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Jack, actually. I don't know, it's Friday night, I'm tired, sorry. Anyone else want to chip in?
I think people are chipping in on the comments. That's what I was looking at.
Marvellous.
Yeah, no.
It's been a long week.
Yeah, well, fortunately, my questions, these questions don't have hard answers, do they? So I won't worry about that. No, they're tough ones, but also, you know, I think that's exactly why we need to talk about it. In the comments, there seems to be a really hot debate in and around what it means and the importance of palpation, which these are the sorts of things we get into. You know, you can't really talk about what utility virtual consulting should have and the integration of it within services, or the blurring of lines between types of care delivery or triage, if you don't start thinking about those clinical cases in which, right, what is the pertinence of manual assessment, be that the palpation or trying to, you know, there'd be a patient you're seeing virtually that you're trying to simulate a decent neuro assessment, of which that the outcome of that neuro assessment is particularly relevant for the severity or urgency that you're evaluating a case on, and potentially will influence the outcomes. And then you've got this, the more, that's a hands-on assessment technique, be difficult to simulate. And then you've got the more hands-on treatment techniques, especially in some people's style of practice, that they put a lot of weight to, and also the way in which we don't, there's a big question mark over how much the patient engagement piece, the way in which we can motivate and inspire, is something that for a lot of people is untested over a camera. Suits some, and we've got some data to support that, especially in early consultation. But you know, we're looking forward to those outcomes coming out in the data. And so it's a big open question mark, I think, at the moment. So I'm glad it's raging on in the comments.
Yeah, and I think it's not going to be easy to justify bringing someone in face to face. It's not been easy during the pandemic, but I don't think it's even going to be easy when we come out the other side. Every clinic has to have minimum areas where there's any 2 or 3 people. You know, it's really going to be difficult. So your almost default would be, it's easier to have a telephone conversation and a remote call. It's harder to bring someone in. So it absolutely has to be the right decision and the right call. So it's almost better, because you've got to justify why you brought someone in from a governance point of view.
Yeah, I suppose everything's become thoughtful, right? The triage process is just ever present, isn't it? And you might have seen them face to face, and then it's like you're immediately evaluating whether or not you need to see them face to face again the next time. So yeah, no, it's great that that's become very conscious. So yeah, absolutely. Now, unfortunately, our Associate Directors for Education, Anne Green and Rena Patel, can't join us tonight, but I want to make sure that we highlight the brilliant picture that Anne Green is obviously one of our favourite people, submitting a headshot. We've got about a dozen headshots for Anne, but she insisted on a new one, which of course is wearing her PPE. So there is Anne Green under that orange mask. They're going to be talking about what the future holds for MSK clinical placements, which of course have been significantly disrupted, as has education at large, for very understandable reasons. There's lots going on in that space. Unfortunately, we have educators as they are, of course, our associate directors, but we've also then got students on that panel. Again, I'll best pull up the exact names. We might as well announce those, which is, we've got Anne Green, who's going to be leading as mainly moderator on that, of course, active moderator, but then Rena as a panelist. We've got Jill Rawlinson from the CSP, who leads up the education, is doing a lot of liaison with the institutions as well as the student groups themselves. We've got Laura Smith, who's a contact that Matthew kindly put us in touch with. She's at a London-based university, remind me, Matthew?
King's College London.
King's College, fantastic, doing some work, especially with you, Matthew, so I will come to you in a second about virtual placements. And then we've got Emily, and oh, sorry, Emily, I don't know if I even dare trying to give your surname a go. No, I'm not even going to try. I'm going to absolutely butcher it. Sorry, Emily, but you're joining us as a student. I will learn how to pronounce your surname by the time we get through to Therapy Live. But we've got then a real breadth of knowledge on that panel to discuss all the U's and R's around what the future lies for clinical placements. So those are our associate directors can't join us to talk about what they're looking forward to for it. But part of that, I imagine, will be in and around this idea of having, if we're doing virtual consultations, how do we integrate students within that? Matthew, that's certainly something you've got some recent experience in. Could you just reflect on that little piece of it?
Yeah, I think it's similar to Paula's comments really about services post-COVID. I think the same questions have to be asked about student placements. And I think we've been doing student placements the same way for a very long time. And this has given us a real opportunity during COVID, but also generally just go, could we do this differently in different learning experiences? We've had 60 virtual students in our organisation over the last 5 weeks. And our learning curve has been massive on it, but there are certainly things we've learned that we would keep virtual, and the same with our clinicians. Going back to Paula's strand, there are things we've learned which, why would we go back? And the same with the student placements. The ability to put students in clinic anywhere, and potentially up to 60 students in a clinic with an expert clinician, and learn from them. We've included them in virtual conferences. All our students will be at Therapy Live, and I'm sure there will be hundreds of students at Therapy Live. And they're all giving us rich feedback about what works, what doesn't work, because they've obviously been there and done different experiences. So yeah, I think that for the terrible tragedy that COVID-19 is, I think the learning experience has just been so rich from it that it applies to all areas of practice.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's been really useful to see, is that despite the widespread disruption, and especially areas which you'd think would be really difficult to adapt into quickly, such as placements, which people just think, oh, well, they're you know, especially at the time when it's been incredibly serious and disruptive, don't get me wrong, but at the time where we thought it was going to be a war zone and the Nightingales were going to be full, these were circumstances where many people just would expect student placements to be so low down the agenda for so long, that but quite soon into it, it was kind of come to realize that it's an integral process that we would all regret letting the wheels totally come off that. So watching the adaptations of you guys, as well as many others, including those that are on that panel, it's just going to be fascinating to hear some of those details, some of those examples that are going to come forward, and hopefully inspire, again, new ways of working, and a diversification of the way in which we deliver placements. It's a shame we're not able to do what we were planning with Manchester Met University through Choose Health actually this summer, where we were doing some community-based placements where they were coming to us, but not necessarily just as a clinical placement. We were going to get more students than we had patients at one point, where we were going to then be putting them into the community, going and knocking on doors and doing some work within the local old people's homes and the sports facilities, and trying to create walking groups, and just making, these were elective placements where you can be a bit more creative, but just this idea of let's just challenge that standard model at a time where everyone's otherwise just up in arms and whinging about lack of placement numbers. Instead, let's try and think in new models, and this is again force that opportunity, and hopefully we can get that data to find out more. Again, some lovely comments coming in. Many thanks to Rich Saxton here, who's saying it seems a good addition to the profession, having an option of a recognised, legitimate remote platform, helping patients who travel a lot or are struggling to come into a clinic for any reason. That accessibility piece, as well as there's even, it's a positive move for green issues, has been mentioned. And obviously it's one of the things that's been mentioned about what we're doing for Therapy Live with regards to people being able to attend at home. Means that we were setting up the infrastructure for Therapy Live before all of this hit as part of a way of decreasing hotel costs, travel costs, make it a bit greener, make it more accessible, make it truly international in that way. So yeah, absolutely a great point, Rich, and thank you for that. Again, lots of more comments coming in. I'm seeing more comments than questions, but please do keep flagging your questions with me. I'll put them to the panel certainly at the end. Now, what I want to do is bring in my fellow director of MSKR, Felicity Thow, who's leading her panel on MSK private, not MSK pirate practice. No, that's a different. That's the other conference that we. Yeah. Oh, it's not meant to. That's a Freudian slip. That's the after hours, the pirate practice. No, MSK private practice, the post-COVID landscape. Flick, you wear many hats, but one of them is as a small business owner running your own private practice. And it's been disruptive to say the least, and not just on the clinical front, but also it's been a massive, MSK private practice falls through the cracks in so many interesting ways. And so it's one of them things where it's going to be a hot topic and contentious, no doubt. But before I forget, let's announce who's going to be joining you on that panel. Well, if I can find it again, scrolling back and forth. Here we go. You're going to have Gemma Oliver, who is a massive friend of Physio Matters, MSK Reform, but also someone who's set up a hugely successful Facebook support group for therapists, which has got over 2,000 members and has been a massive crutch to huge amounts of therapists in recent times. She's going to be joining us and reflecting on keeping her ear close to the ground and finger on the pulse to all things private practice. We've also got Rupert Crowfoot, who is the CEO, I understand, or certainly senior manager and owner of Six Physio in London, who's been very involved in the MSK Partners Network, who've been doing lots of lobbying for the industry, trying to get petitions to try and get the rates relief and some of the integral business movements on that. And then we've got Karen Lay, who is the chair of the Physio First, which is the Chartered Society's professional network for private practice. So she'll be joining us on that panel. And Flick, you're going to be heading that up. And as our active moderators, as we said before, you'll be able to give your take on the matter. So don't give too many spoilers away. But what is it you're looking forward to as you thrash that out with your panel?
Well, first of all, I must say hello to my mum, who is tuned into every one of these every week.
Everyone.
Hope that I might be on one. So hello, Phil. Finally on.
Hello,
but what am I looking forward to? I think this is going to be a really interesting one. And as you say, private practice in COVID times it's been obliterated. Firstly, I've been fortunate in that as you say, I do have multiple hats and I'm elsewhere employed. But you mentioned Gemma Oliver. I'm pleased to have her on the group. That Facebook group has been great and so well used. But I think a lot of what will come up is obviously government guidance will never be. And now physio practices can reopen. So a lot of interpretation of guidance, and sometimes, of course, you want to interpret the guidance in the way that you want to interpret the guidance, because you want to be in business, of course. So I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion.
It's something that comes up intermittently, both in our internal conversations within our team, Flick, but also it's something that's noticed by many people, that compared to most people attached to Physio Matters, you're just a far nicer person than most of us. And as part of that analysis, it's that I wondered what your thoughts were on when we're sort of frustrated at people wanting spoon feeding and expecting the government to suddenly say you can now open your private practice, and then unless you get that level of detail, then everyone's been up in arms. I wondered if you are more sympathetic than some of us to that, and you think that actually there should be more specificity to the guidance, and too much has been put up on a sort of risk assessed individual basis. What's your sort of take on the matter?
Maybe. I mean, stay alert. That was very precise, wasn't it? That's where we're at in terms of the government guidance, I guess. We're definitely not going to get you may see this type of patient. So I think we can't ask the government to do that. We can't ask much from them currently. But in terms, I know there was a lot of discussion on the Facebook page about guidance from people like the CSP, from Physio First. I think Physio First are probably well placed to put out guidance, and there subsequently has been much more input from them. So I don't think that we will ever get that kind of advice from the government. There is this, I guess we're waiting on people like hairdressers who come into close proximity with people who come in frequently. But I think what people have looked for is more CSP Physio First guidance, which, as I say, it has come, but I think a lot of it is in the interpretation.
I think that's what's been frustrating people, isn't it? They almost want it spoon feeding, and I think that one of the interesting things that it has unearthed, which I know I would say this, and I think I'll probably get a few nodding heads because it's part of our broader analysis, is that the constitutional responsibilities of things like organisations like the CSP and Physio First and things that had no legal mandate and would have been quickly sued if they'd have been more forthright than they were, meant that they ended up having expectations from their membership to do a certain thing when their constitution wouldn't allow it. Now, we've been people that have been critical of that constitution, so we were sort of sympathetic in some ways to knowing that they couldn't do things, but similarly frustrated that maybe if you'd listened to those things 5 years ago, you wouldn't have been between a rock and a hard place, because they couldn't necessarily be as overt as some people wanted. But then when they were then providing guidance, people then were sometimes playing fast and loose with it. And it's a really interesting sort of way in which autonomy became paramount. With the general discussions on Gemma's group, I just want to make sure we highlight that this 5 minutes is certainly no substitute for the 90 minutes that was done last night on an incredible feed that I've only caught up on half of, which is about the reflections of clinic owners that have reopened under provisions and different levels of contact that people have had with the public and their feedback. It's absolutely brilliant what Gemma's done to bring that together as a community of practice in a time of crisis. So it's going to be great to have her on the panel, but please, if you're in that situation and you're looking for some support as well as some being able to tune in to like minds talking about some of the U's and R's of those issues, then please do tune in to some of those live streams that they've been putting together. It's been absolutely brilliant. So really looking forward to that, and you're certainly well placed to bring that together, Flick, because it's another hotly contested issue. So really looking forward to hearing that. I think I'm up next. Let me just flash it back on screen. This is a bit of a niche one in many ways, but super important and overlaps nicely with some of the stuff that no doubt Paula's panel will be talking about, ensuring and commissioning MSK care post-COVID. And I will just close that back down actually I'll leave that up as I announce the panelists for that. And so we've just got one more to confirm on it, so I can't tell you exactly who's going to be joining on the third seat, but Paul Allen from Connect, the Director of Director of NHS Services for Connect, as well as Martin Doherty, who works for Aviva, a physiotherapist by background, but works in their commissioning and ensuring and packaging of care for Aviva. We also hopefully have a commissioner. We've got two commissioners that have been approached and likely to have one of those confirmed very shortly, to talk a little bit about what that's going to be, because there's certainly lots of financial factors upstream of the service design piece that's going to be relevant. And it's something that I know has been talked about both in private practice as well as in MSK care in the NHS and even those intermediate sectors such as Nuffield. where if there's any expectation to return to previous KPIs or a previous capacity, or that the funding doesn't adapt like the rest of it's going to need to, then it all breaks down and falls away. But similarly, if the answer is, well, let's just zero out any accountability, it becomes the Wild West of yesteryear, and we have no way of measuring any service data in a meaningful way. So we've got to try and find this balance, and we'll find it quickly. So it's going to be absolutely fascinating for me to try and hash that out with some of the best thinkers in that space, and talk about what a mature model would be that has an appropriate amount of accountability, but within a framework that is rational and sensible. Paula, I want to just ask you a question on that, if I may, about how important it is that we at the very least start that conversation as quickly as we can, because I imagine that's going to be a piece that really affects the service design bit.
Yeah, because there's no new normal. So what it used to look like is not what it's going to look like moving forward. We've got to redo the numbers. You know, how can we manage the amount that we used to manage? I don't know. Them conversations need to be had sooner rather than later. Yeah, we can't wait. It needs thinking about. What could it look like? What can we do? How many numbers can we do on the phone? Yeah, that
one of the fascinating things for me is that we just, and I've been having these conversations with several different groups, especially amongst the arm's length bodies, formerly or sometimes known as Quangos, are sometimes talking about aspiring to return as quickly as we can to some of those things, as I mentioned before, not just styles of practice, but also just crossing their fingers that they can just get the cogs turning on the normal funding streams and funnels as best they can. But then also sometimes thinking that we could postpone that conversation indefinitely until the data's in, as if a conclusive answer will emerge. I also see service managers sometimes just looking at waiting and hoping for some sort of top-down solution, then inevitably whinging about when the top-down solution comes that they don't agree with, rather than thinking, well, how can we start to at least have that conversation, make a case, build that discussion up, problematize it, and then start to look at solution focus to then, what does the grassroots say? What can we test? What pilots can we run when unfortunately the top down hasn't come? And as MSKR, I can't help but mention that we damn well tried. You know, the Rehab Recruits campaign and the advocacy work that we tried to do early doors was to try and move that conversation forward, offer a workforce solution, as well as then discuss the fact that let's creak into gear as quickly as we can about a way in which we put the primacy of rehabilitation at the heart of care and change the governance and funding structures as quickly as we can. Just, you know, we reached this hand out in as many ways as we could, and it wasn't reached back. And part of that maps onto what Emma's going to be talking about, which is why understanding rehabilitation, which you'd think would be low-hanging fruit, turns out the higher you go into the NHS, they haven't even got a comprehension of it, in my opinion. And so it's going to be fascinating to see just how much overlap there is across all of these panels. Some lovely comments coming in. Again, thank you. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. Some really good points in understanding that the worries in the interpretation of the guidance, when the owner of the practice not being a clinician, there's various different things there that I know will come up in your chat, Flick. And some really good points as well about you know, Daniel Gerber mentioning there as well, with regards to there's always going to be a multidisciplinary approach to it, and why we need to try and make sure we get the conversation going amongst all MSK clinicians, so that there isn't, we don't put fuel on the fire of the old turf wars. You know, if your physios are behaving differently to your osteos and your sports therapists, etc., then it's only going to ramp that up, and there's going to be accusations of safety or non-safety across the board. Right, now, next up, here we go. Where's my graphic gone? Lovely. I think we're onto his last one, and then I'm going to throw a couple of these questions at all the. Hold on, where's my screen share? There we go. Okay, so finishing the day up, we have Jonathan Hersey is with, and it says, and patient guests rather than just guests. He's got patients on. It's not meaning that his guests are very patient because they've waited all day to go on stage. It's that they are care service users, clients, whatever you call them. He's going to be joined by a number of patient advocates who, what we observed, and I'd be interested to see if this, I'm sure there's a counter narrative out there that we need to hear out as well, which is that some valuable patient voices that were front and center of some of the work we've been doing with MSKR were then at a time where, instead of leaning into understanding their lived experiences and how that could influence care delivery, when a crisis hit, it seemed to squeeze them out once again. We moved backwards. Now, I'm begging the question a little bit, and I do accept that that's my bias, but I'm not on that panel, so I won't worry about it. But Jonathan, as someone that's involved in service design and delivery, I just thought it'd be a brilliant guest moderator, an active moderator who will give his take, of course, but just to get those patient voices chatting about the way in which they can get stuck in to helping, and what happened at this crucial time as to whether their voice was heard more or less, and how can we get it back to the fore if it has indeed been faded away. So David Gilbert, who wrote The Patient Revolution, a fantastic book. I need to get round to, David, if you're listening, I need to get round to making sure I get you that review on Amazon. Fantastic book that he wrote about the way in which the patient voice could be integrated into healthcare delivery. Patient director of an NHS trust who shared a little bit, and I'm piggybacking his analysis a little bit about the fact that his voice and others were squeezed out rather than lent into at a time of crisis. Adrian McGregor, former patient of mine, an MSKR member, MSKR advocacy group worker who's worked hard on some of the understanding of how we can better understand the way patients bring with them such a massive rich tapestry of experience that is diverse beyond healthcare and could be utilised. And so I know his take on that is going to be really interesting, as well as Louise Trewern. Sorry, again, I'm terrible at pronouncing names today, but another great patient voice, someone who's experienced persistent pain, who is becoming a really important voice in understanding how to weave in that patient narrative, but also just giving her take on what could be done as we restructure to make sure that then all voices are heard, both professional and otherwise. So really excited for that as a panel, and a brilliant way to close the day up on our Thinking in Public stream at a time where I would say, with my bias hat on, other organisations are sort of hiding from discussion. They've gone quiet. We're all busy, but some of them have even stopped putting newsletters out. So what we've done is we've lent into our conversational style, and we're going to be debating a whole day's worth of policy discussion. So really excited to bring you that, and thank you so much to all of our wonderful speakers and panelists that are going to join us on that. So final few questions that we want to go to from Facebook, so do keep bringing them in. But one of the things I wanted to throw out to anyone that fancies it is there a danger that some of the people that are critical of some of our style, where we are wanting to think in public, we're not waiting for the analysis to come in, we're not waiting for all the data before we make to provoke this conversation, is there a danger that we are being too gung-ho to even have the conversation, and is watchful waiting actually some sort of strategy that we're missing because we're being keen?
I would no, I don't think we are being too gung-ho at all. And I was going to say about the final stream with the patients, and David Gilbert, who runs Patient Revolution. I was lucky enough to be able to go to his Patient Revolution meeting this week, which is a group of people who use the services within the NHS, and there were diabetic patients, there was mental health patients, and we think it's frustrating for us to have these good ideas and for them to be slow to take off. Imagine being a patient and having great ideas about how you could better manage diabetes care, and just not having a voice for that. So I think we'd be daft not to use this platform, and I'd give everyone a voice.
Yeah, sorry, Matt.
No, go on, ladies first.
Oh. Why wouldn't we be having the conversations? I don't understand why you wouldn't. Planning is everything, isn't it? You can't execute a plan without planning, and without planning, you're just responding like a knee jerk, and that's risky. I think that's more risk. why not have the conversations of, you know, you need your contingency plans, don't you? So now more than ever, we should be starting to absolutely have conversations. I know we're having them next week. We're not waiting. We've got to have a plan. What could it look like? We have to be ready when the call comes. We can gradually open up a bit more. You can't wait. You can't wait. And I don't think it's anxious enough this time. You know, the mental health of our staff is really important. And actually the anxieties of not knowing, it's like anything, isn't it? It's the not knowing that kills you. It absolutely does. People need to know that people are planning and everything is being thought of, every caveat is being thought of, and then you put that plan to the team have an input. There's nothing worse, as we know, than top-down leadership. It needs to be a collaboration, it needs to be bottom-up, and we influence the leaders. So we need to be having these conversations, absolutely. Now's the time. Get talking.
Lovely. Matthew?
Yeah, well, I go back to the point I made earlier of that it's such a rich learning experience at the moment. I cannot think, I've been practicing for 20 years, I cannot think of a time where the learning has been so rich in terms of what's going on, a bit more freedom to experiment and do different things because we have to, and we've lost some of the red tape. And as Paul says, you need plans. You don't need a plan, you need 12 plans with the eventuality that one of them might come to fruition. And yeah, and why at any time in your life, and it comes back to our manifesto about core skills of critical thinking, why would you stop learning and thinking at any time or progressing conversations? It strikes me as bizarre. And somebody made a similar point on Twitter. There was a conversation and somebody pointed out, well, why are you having this during COVID? And I'm like, well, because I want to learn all the time. I don't want to pause and wait and think about things. And again, I haven't got to acknowledge that COVID is a tragedy. It's affected people's lives, and we talked about private practices, but it doesn't mean that we should stand and bow our heads until it's over and not go forwards. And final point really is, who are we kidding that we had it right before COVID? We've got, if we had it perfect, then we should be going back to it. But actually, we've almost got a little bit of an opportunity to get the aircraft down in the hangar for a little while. Why not redesign it in the hangar for a little bit rather than mid-air, as we've been trying to do for the last, well, at least as long as I've been practicing.
It's a lovely analogy. I think one of the things, if I was to try and give some strength to an argument I'm not a fan of, which is that other organisations look on at what we're doing and have been critical of some of even our recent work. They usually, at least, they're rarely presenting a decent counter, but one of the things they do is, why do you have to do it in public? So having the conversation, yeah, we were doing that, but behind closed doors, don't you know, we'll write a document about it one day. They get frustrated at the fact that we're wanting to have that with a broad audience. We want to involve patients, etc. And they sometimes see it as being airing dirty laundry, etc. Emma, just wondered if you had any thoughts on almost, and feel free for it to be if you agree, you might well agree with that, but if you don't, if you think that we're justified in what we're doing, why do you think we do it?
Oh no, we're totally justified in what we're doing, in my opinion. I mean, this is the new way of the world. It's just we were ahead of the game when we started doing more online things and open discussions and open forums. We know that things getting out, doing it the old way, the evidence into practice, there's a 10-year gap. You know, this is speeding the whole thing up, and that's what we want. You know, things, if they're published and it takes 10 years before they get embedded or even looked at, it's all out of date. But just going back to some of the things that Paula and Matt were saying, I totally agree with what they're saying. Yeah, we shouldn't be waiting. We can't wait. We're not waiting. I mean, where I work, we've done a PPIE exercise, sort of affiliated with Keele, and we had lots of patients done, you know, obviously like this, using a forum like this, where we were asking them questions about how they felt about how it was going and what things we could be doing better. And from that, they were sort of saying generally they like it. You know, obviously you've got the whole, don't have to worry about the car parking. It's quite nice. They even mentioned it's nice to see the physio's face rather than having a mask on it, providing we can still do that with the new Boris's ideas of wearing masks all the time. But anyway, putting that to one side, they liked lots of things about doing it digitally, including some of the you know, over 65 people in the group. So definitely we need to be proactive. One thing that they were saying is like, what patients are are going to be moving forward to the new way of working, which patients will benefit more. And from that, we're looking at doing a survey. It's going to be led by one of my colleagues called Vincent McSweeney, where I work, and we're just putting that in for ethical approval imminently. And we're trying to find out exactly which patients will be the ones who will be best for, say, video consultation compared to other forms of face-to-face or telephone, so we can help inform what's moving forward, which obviously sits very comfortably with evidencing the whole thing. So don't wait for the things to come to you, pick things up and run with them. And that's for everybody to do. Data is rich and it's informative.
I think it's no surprise to us, but that's just another great example of our Associate Director for Evidence at MSK Reform using 3 or 4 different examples in which through research, patient survey data, as well as us understanding the subjective experiences of our patients, is going to inform all of the work that we're going to do and try and bring that together, as well as us documenting carefully what's going to be the MSKR stream. That Thinking in Public at Therapy Live is going to be an exercise in you participating in building our voice, not as an exercise in just sharing, but also then driving policy that we can then refine some of the things that we feel are appropriate from the manifesto reform of last year that can be then worked on ahead, but also then making adjustments as is appropriate. It will be really, truly something that is an interval where we will reevaluate and reassess our objectives and priorities and be able to put that to the MSKR membership as is planned in the coming months to try and make sure we sharpen that and be truly democratic with our voting preferences and work out what it is we want to do as an organisation to drive for positive change. So thank you all so much for joining me as ever. That final graphic once more for those that are watching and those that are tuning in, of course, after the fact, of which is that the majority that listen to this as a podcast afterwards in their thousands. And thank you for those that have joined us in the newscast over the coming weeks. But that's the agenda for the 9th stream. I realise now that on Facebook I've put episode 8, it's episode 9, and the final one. But you will keep an eye out on the competitions that we're running across Therapy Live from some of the show sponsors, and do pay attention on social media for all sorts of other exciting announcements that are going to be coming, as well as the final graphics that will be coming over the weekend for all of these individual sessions at the MSKR stream. Come along, it will be very much interactive. You can upvote questions, you can participate by offering questions up yourself. The moderation process will be very rich, much like the Big R's process, as well as Physio Matters, of course. Be very involved, and the interface that we're using is something that is going to be as we're going to be emulating in-person shows, but at a scale that only virtual can allow. So 17,000 delegates now are registered. We're on track for 20,000 at Therapy Live. And so please do make sure that you're one of them and join us on the 26th of June. Yep, 26th of June. Have I got that right? Yeah. I'm tired, aren't I? The therapy-live.co.uk is how you do that, and you join there on the day. It's really straightforward. Make sure you're on our mailing list and check out that. Make sure you're finding our emails that are coming to you every couple of days at the moment. But anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you so much for everyone that's joining. The chat's been really interesting. I'm looking forward to reading some more of the comments. Thank you all, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.